guys, it's Sophie. So I thought I'd make a video talking to you guys about what it's been like for me to be trying to read less, what it's been like for me to be trying to read more deeply, and what impact it's had on my reading and sort of my life as a whole. I thought it would be interesting. We've got a couple of books I'm going to talk about in here specifically as well, in the sort of review style, so that might be interesting for you guys too. So as some of you might know, if you've watched my Why I Want to Read Less video, I've been actively trying to reduce the amount I'm reading in order to allow me to spend more time exploring things around those books and to try and gain a better understanding of the books themselves. A good example would be in Don DeLillo's Point and Meagre. It describes 24-hour Psycho, which is the viewing of Psycho over a 24-hour period. Rather than sort of just say, oh yeah, that's fine, I know what happens in Psycho, I wanted to go and sit down and watch it and then go back and read. And you add so much. I think that's what I've learned, is it's possible to pack much more into a book than is in the pages if you're willing to put the time in. And what I want to do today is talk about two books and sort of a little bit of sort of outside reading that I've done around David Foster Wallace, because this is how this all sort of was sparked really. In reading Infinite Jest, I learned a lot about how much time I was taking with my reading and a lot about how much time I was spending on each book, and I think it's slightly sparked in me knowing that I really wanted to read this book but didn't feel I could, and that wasn't something I wanted to feel. So I have been going out and reading more about David Foster Wallace. For those of you who are a bit sick of David Foster Wallace, I understand, and I'll put the time up for you if you'd like, as to when this is all sort of wrapped up. So you may have seen me talk about Every Love Story is a Ghost Story, a book by D.T. Max about David Foster Wallace. I picked this book up because, having read Infinite Jest and watched a great deal of interviews on YouTube, which is something I've never done before, never done that with a book before, to go away directly after reading it and then see the author talking about that book. I've seen some sort of book events, at sort of book festivals, etc., but I've never gone out and sought that. It was a really lovely experience. It added so much to my understanding of it, and also to what the audiences were saying about the book at the time. And I think when I'd got as much as I could from those interviews, I really wanted to know a little bit more about David Foster Wallace as a person, to try and help me sort of understand a little bit about why he felt the way he did about certain issues, and potentially why certain things were included in the novel. This is a biography of David Foster Wallace that was written after his death, and really talks about a great deal of his life. And it was just a really lovely addition to the entire thing. It rounded off a lot of ideas for me. It was terribly sad. The title, I think, is terribly sad, and the idea is that you're unable to write a love story about someone or to someone, but whilst they're there, like whilst they're in your life, that love stories are always written after you've lost someone. And this book sort of focuses on David Foster Wallace in that way, and saying that you couldn't really understand him until he wasn't there anymore. I think he as a person resonates with me a great deal. I feel that certain elements of our lives we had quite a lot in common, and this book upset me, which is weird because I've only read one book from this author, I've never met the person, and it really did upset me. I felt a loss in this, and I think partly that was because I'd taken the time with Infinite Jest and lived in that world, and partly because I'd gone out and I'd sought out those interviews and heard him speak and heard a little bit more about who he was. And in this book, sort of exploring that loss, it did really actually personally touch me, which I wasn't expecting. And that's something that I gained, sort of a much more emotional understanding of him. I also was sent this book by Social Book Review, which is one of his essay collections, a supposedly fun thing I'll never do again, because I wanted to get a different view, I suppose, on him. It seemed to me that his fiction was what he was doing seriously, and that his non-fiction was what he did to fill time. But I felt as though the author himself, I would get a better idea of him as a whole person in doing this. And I really wanted to gain a little bit more of that voice. I missed it. It was a big experience reading Infinite Jest. It took a long time, and I missed the voices, I missed the sort of style, and I did get an element of that in here. I will say that David Foster Wallace is very funny, like very painfully funny. I laughed out loud sort of several essays in here, not all of them, some of them are heavier and a bit more serious, but the ones that were intended to be funny, I thought were hilarious. There's one where he's sort of at this county fair, and it's just sort of experiencing all of these sort of like great rural sort of the machinery, I suppose, like the way in which agriculture is functioning and how large it is as an industry, and how sort of the whole Midwest sort of, it's the spine of the Midwest really, but he's sort of this outsider. I come from a rural background and have been to many sort of agricultural fairs. In my childhood I used to love it. There's one called the Bath and West. It's brilliant if you ever get a chance to go to the Bath and West. And I think the fact I've been to things like this made it really, really, really funny for me. But equally, I've never been on a cruise, and the last essay was also absolutely hilarious. The author is kind of like an intellectual, I suppose, and to have the idea of him at like events like a county fair and events like a cruise, it's sort of that sore thumb element, and for those who can't imagine themselves in that situation, it puts you there, and he's just very skillful at how he writes, and very careful about how he writes as well. So I think in that particular example I have jumped into a lot more than I ever would have done just by reading Infinite Jest, and I've gained more I think about the author, about the novel, and my understanding really of that whole person, as well as the kind of atmosphere that he was writing in, and I never would have been able to do that before, and I think that is what is really important. Whilst I was reading at the pace I was and thinking about reading in the way I was, I could not have done that. Because it would have been too slow, it would have taken too much time. Another example would have been in A Supposedly Fun Thing I'd Never Do Again. There is a David Lynch essay talking about the movie Lost Highway. I'd never seen it, and rather than normally what I would have done is just read through and said, oh, who cares, it doesn't matter if I've not seen it, I'll just read it through, or even skip the essay. I was like, no, this is ridiculous. You want to enjoy the book, go watch the movie. It's an hour of your life or 2 hours of your life. And I watched the movie, and I never would have done that before. I think I realised how restrained I was in my reading through trying to read less, which sounds weird, but it's kind of true. I've also been able to read more stuff that isn't necessarily novels, and that's been really fun. So I've been wanting for ages to read McSweeney's. I've been eyeing them up online for ages. I'm wanting to buy some and thinking, yeah, but it's not going to go on my TBR and it's not going to count as a book I've read. So what? If I want to read it, I want to read it, and it's been lovely. I just thought it would be kind of nice just to give you a picture of where I've gone with this, because I don't want to seem as though I'm saying these like pronouncements and then just disappearing off. I do take what I say quite seriously. And I think it's been really interesting. I think it's making me read in a very different way. It's also allowed me to have 2 rereads in a month, something else I wouldn't have done. It has meant that my TBR shelf is fairly large, because I've not quite tailored in my head that I need to buy less if I'm going to read less, but I will equalise that and it will stop expanding at such a gargantuan rate. But yeah, I want to know what you guys think. Have you ever tried this? Have you ever tried to think about the whole way in which you're doing something differently, and if so, have you found any sort of barriers? Have you found anything that you found difficult? I think for me personally, I found it really difficult to realise that I might have missed so much, and questioning like how much time have I spent that may as well not have been spent reading, and that's kind of sad for me because I love it, and I'm trying to sort of in my head say, well, at least you loved it at the time. You might not have got everything you could from it, but you still enjoyed it, so it's still worth your time. But yeah, I just thought I would just, have a little bit of a chat, a little bit of a discussion video. And do let me know if you are planning on reading less, and if you have started to read less, what has your experience been? Have you felt any of the same things? And if you never want to, if you always want to read at a sort of consumption pace, why? Why does that interest you? And what do you gain from that for you personally? I'll see you soon in my next video, which is going to be my October wrap up. Bye bye guys. I deserve all of the props for having the self-control to pause, as the judge says. The winner for the Man Booker 2016 is